Welcome to the Revolution of Man podcast. I'm your host, Lance Cashion. This podcast is an extension of my blog at Revolution of Man at Substack. So you can go there and read my blog, enjoy all the content. And for $6 a month, you can subscribe and get exclusive content and support my work. That's the price of a cup of coffee. So this is episode 26. And the topic today is a dangerous ideology, looking at repressive tolerance from a biblical worldview. And my guest is Tyler Durham, a good friend of mine. And we recorded this live at TCU at the University Debate Chamber back on the 23rd of September. And this is just our discussion right there at TCU with students and faculty and guests in the room. And we're so grateful to TCU for allowing us to do that, and all the professors and TPUSA TCU for sponsoring. So this is that conversation. I also serve as a pastor at King's Cross Fellowship Church here in Fort Worth. And you can go to kingscrossfellowship.com and check that out. And then also I serve as the founder and CEO of the Forge Room Foundation, where we forge Christians who shape culture in Fort Worth through worldview knowledge and faithful action. And if you want to find out more about the Forge Room, you can go to forgeroom.org. I'm also on Instagram and X and all those platforms, but please share and like and comment. I hope that you enjoy this conversation. The Revolution of Man podcast recorded live at TCU. Thanks, and God bless.
This is week 3 of an 8-week series that we've been blessed and fortunate to have the opportunity to do here on the TCU campus. Really, we've been doing the Revolution of Man podcast for, what has it been, a year where you've had me on and we've had conversations?
Almost 2 years, I think.
Yeah, and we thought, why don't we try this format in a live audience on the TCU campus? And so what we're going to attempt to do is have a conversation. There's times where we might get a little preachy or might refer the audience, but really what we're doing is having a conversation like we normally would in a studio. And we're trying to hit some of the big issues that we're dealing with, specifically college students. What are the issues for Christian college students that are up front and center? And we're living in a time and place where there's a lot of relevant issues that are going on in terms of living out our faith, articulating our faith. And so tonight we're going to talk about the idea of repressive tolerance, or the intolerance of tolerance. And so we'll get into that in a minute. But why don't you tell us about what you've been doing the last few days?
Right. So again, this is a podcast format, so it's more casual. We talk about deep theological issues, and we have a lot of fun as the time has gone on here. This is our 3rd week, so I'm a little bit more relaxed with people listening to us have a conversation, even though hundreds of people hear the podcast. It's different. It's just different in a room full of people. So, and I'm glad that you guys are here as well. So, really wanted started with the elephant in the room, which was the assassination of Charlie Kirk last week. Because if or 2 weeks ago, just the night before, we were in this room, and then wake up the next day around noon, a little afternoon, news spread around the world of his assassination, and within minutes, tens of millions of people saw it, including young people that hadn't seen anything like that ever, and they're getting it on their phones through social media, things like that. So we wanted to be able to, that as our starting point, and I think it's important to
100%. I mean, there. As you guys probably feel the same way. I remember the exact place I was and the moment that I got the news.
And where were you? Like, what was going on?
I was at my house, and I was sitting in our kitchen at the kitchen table, and a friend of mine shot me a text and just said, "Did you hear that Charlie got shot?" And like so many of us, I stumbled upon the video looking for information on what happened, and it was shocking. It was traumatic to watch. I was just stunned. And especially considering some of the things that you and I have been talking about for years now,
right?
That it was like a culmination of all of these events that are happening in the culture, specifically on university campuses. So it was shocking, and what was even more shocking, or equally shocking, was the memorial, and
Right.
and seeing some of the most powerful people in our country boldly share the gospel, talk about Jesus Christ in a very open and transparent and direct way. And I'm encouraged and inspired by the reaction to that horrible event. And
Right.
and yeah, so I spoke at a FCA event, Fellowship of Christian Athletes in Louisiana, 2 weekends ago. So it was the week that event happened, and obviously changed my talk, and it was on everybody's mind. It's still on everybody's mind. And so I think a lot of people are seeking the Lord and are giving church another chance, giving Christianity another chance, or even seeking it for the first time. But you actually went to the memorial.
I went to the memorial, and to back up just a bit, because I remember where I was. I was taking a break from working. I work from home, my office in my home, and that's usually where we do this podcast, is at my house. But I was sitting there just taking a break, ate lunch, and just got on social media, and it was just flooded with the images, and I was in disbelief for a while. I was just shocked. Mm-hmm. And my wife came in the front door, and she just stopped and looked at me. She's like, "What happened? Something was wrong." And that's when I said, "Charlie been shot, and it doesn't look good," because by that time I'd seen enough of the videos. I was like, "This isn't good." Mm-hmm. And so we prayed, and kind of the world stopped for a few minutes. And
now, did you follow? Did you? How closely did you follow him?
I followed him pretty closely. I've seen, I don't know how many hours of his videos. I always learned something from him, particularly in interacting with people. How he handled debate, even people that were just yelling at him, and so I appreciated him as a Christian man in the arena, in the public square, and again his heart for college students. And that was his focus, was bringing the truth and bringing open debate and discussion to colleges and to these students. And I learned that he always answered emails. Like, he would answer thousands of emails. I hate email. And as you know, I won't answer an email for a couple of days. But yeah, so after that happened, you were out of town, so I was going to be in the pulpit. I'd been working on one sermon, and then on, Wednesday, I'm wrestling with what do. I tried to move forward with that original sermon, and it was just blocked. What had happened, the event just completely overtook my mind.
It was a sermon on giving, by the way. I was like, hey, I'm going to be out of town. Why don't you give a talk on giving while I'm out?
Thanks,
I'm
bro.
a vocational pastor.
Yeah.
And but that went out the window real quick.
You do the giving sermon, Lance. Thanks, bro. So we had a discussion. I think it was the next day. I think it was maybe Thursday. Had a discussion and with our other elder, and basically reformatted and said, I think I'm going to talk about this, so I can't preach the other sermon. So I'm going to put that back on your plate, the giving sermon, Tyler. And then so I just decided that I would preach on Charlie Kirk, called Next Man Up. And it's based on a passage in Acts where David served God's purposes in his generation. Mm-hmm. And so that was a lot of prep time. Wasn't ready for that. The emotion of the event, and then all just regular life going on. My son tested for a black belt, got his black belt that Saturday. So that was a 6-hour test, by the way. That was crazy. Yeah. I don't want to do it's hard enough for me.
Some of those pictures were pretty sweet.
He gets some airtime. Yeah. He didn't get that from me. His poor mother, though, Catherine, was just watching through.
Terrified,
he was sparring and stuff. She doesn't usually like to watch that. So, but in the event, so it did the sermon, and then I think it was Wednesday afternoon or Thursday.
Before you get into that, I just want to make a comment on my experience with Charlie Kirk. I really didn't follow a lot of his talks on campuses.
Right.
The prove me wrong things. It just wasn't popping up on my algorithm. I really wasn't. But I followed him with his podcast and really a lot of the stuff politically. I followed him and was really impressed with his wisdom and knowledge at such a young age in the field of politics and culture. But after his assassination, I started going back and looking at all of his campus events, and he really was an evangelist and an apologist. And I think in my mind, I thought of him more politically. But when you start seeing footage after footage of him just boldly sharing the gospel, I just was blown away at how direct and upfront he was with his faith. And so that was that was really encouraging.
And I watched his political stuff as well, listened to his podcast. But the first things I saw of him on the campus is like, this guy's pretty bold going on, and particularly some of the campuses he was going on and some of the things that were said to him. And then it grew from there. But and then I think it was Wednesday or Thursday of last week, a friend of mine from TPU SA Faith, who I think is here somewhere. There he is, Brian Chapman, said that they had some passes for pastors to go to the memorial service in Phoenix. And I, at first, declined because my wife and son were out of town, and I had Lily. And then I text my wife and Nelson, and they both said, you have to go, and we'll figure it out. So booked some tickets, booked a hotel, got a car, and made my way to Phoenix, and watched all those people converging. And I was late. I was like, I'm not going to get in. There's Secret Service and all. I mean, it's crazy. And waiting for 2 hours to get to the venue was really interesting because it was really hot. People were walking for miles to get in, and they may not even get in. There's close to, I think, 250,000 people that converged. The venue we were in only held 80,000, something like that. So it was completely full. But the spirit of the people that were going, and people were handing out waters out of their cars and checking on people because people were sitting like on the sidewalk. It's hot, elderly, little kids, people carrying babies. But then I was like, I'm not going to make it. They're going to cut off the entry where I was supposed to get in. And I was really concerned because I was already an hour late. And imagine that. Always an hour late. Except here tonight, I was an hour late. I was an hour early. But in any event, I was just in my car praying. I was like, there's no place to park. And then a gate opened up to a field right where I was supposed to get credentialed. Like, I just made the turn. There were two cars in front of me. They both turned, and they're like, come in, come in. And all these cars started turning, and that field filled up in like 15 minutes. And I was right there, got in. And I'm still processing the experience itself, but it was incredible. The highlight, I don't know if highlight's not the most significant moment was when Erica forgave Charlie's murderer.
Yeah.
And the way that she spoke about that, Jesus from the cross, forgive them for that they know not what they do. And I mean, it was silent. I mean, I could almost hear my heartbeat. It was so quiet in that room, and you're surrounded by 80,000 people, and it is dead silent. And she forgave him, and I'm like, that is incredible. How hard would it be?
Yeah,
how hard is it for a wife and a mother to forgive for something like that? And then, of course, you had the politicians and leaders there.
Yeah, I can't imagine being in the room.
I was, 50 feet away from Elon Musk, all these people that you see on media all the time. And then there were a lot of Christian leaders from all different backgrounds, denominations and backgrounds. So it was incredible. Hard to describe.
Okay, so let me ask you something. You look at the response from some people in our society, and a lot of people that are, terrifyingly in important positions in our society, whether it's military or government or education, higher education, that were, celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk. And in fact, I saw this morning a clip on X of a high up State Department official that was saying the world's better off now without Charlie Kirk in it. And
right.
And he was he was excited that this happened because it was good for the world, was the argument he was making. So what is that with, when you look at his clips, he's having conversations, and with those who are there to just insult and cause a ruckus. He was very direct and was very blunt. If they're not there to have a conversation, next person there, and he was very blunt about his faith and his beliefs. But why are so many people excited to see something like this?
Well, besides, celebrating the death of anyone, I think, is wrong. We're created in God's image and with intrinsic value and worth. Even the people that we would consider enemies, most hated villains in the world. But Charlie Kirk wasn't one of those. People could disagree with his positions, and that's what he loved. But there is a worldview mindset, a logic that we live in that is antithetical to our Western Christian American heritage, that is foreign, and it is can oftentimes turn violent. And we saw the outworking of that worldview, and the celebration of it then becomes okay in certain sectors, where it becomes you celebrate the death of your enemy, particularly when someone's been labeled the things that Charlie Kirk was labeled.
But a lot of these people are, their message is tolerance and acceptance, and the problem in our society is that there's a large group of people that are on the right or conservative or really are anti-progress in society, that those are the intolerant people. Mm-hmm. And everything would be fine, or our society would be much better if those people would just accept these lifestyles, these behaviors, and this progress in our society. And then their response to someone who is disagreeing with their views, but doing it verbally, is violence. So you talk about it's a different worldview. What in that worldview would equate words that I disagree with therefore we can act violently towards that individual?
So with the worldview that we're dealing with is a Marxian type of worldview at its root. So it believes what it believes about the nature of man, the nature of God, the nature of truth is completely different than what we would claim as Christians. So automatically you're dealing with a different worldview, means a different philosophy of life, and then it works its way out into every area of your life. Whatever you believe is how you're going to live. And so the question that worldview is distinctly answering is, what's wrong with the world and how do we fix it? Mm-hmm. And we come at that question, a different worldview is going to answer that question differently, right? So a Christian would say, well, what's wrong with the world? Well, I'm a sinner. As G.K. Chesterton said that in an editorial in London Times one time. They asked the question, what's wrong with the world? And he wrote back, I'm, dear editors, I'm what's wrong with the world. Right. Sincerely, G.K. Chesterton. And what he's alluding to is that we realize that we're sinful nature, not born good. We're born fallen, and that we're the problem. It's the sin that's the problem. The materialistic Marxian worldview is going to say, well, the problem's outside. If we can just fix the systems, fix everything on the outside, then we're implicitly good. We just have to liberate ourselves from all of these structures and institutions that keep us from being our true selves, our authentic selves. So when the question is asked, what's wrong with the world and how do we fix it? It's the outside of me is the problem with the world. The outside of my group is the problem with the world. So therefore, we have to fix that system. Well, how do you do that? Well, it's through revolution. So what that ends up doing is that labeling.
Okay,
something
so
like.
pause for
go
one
ahead.
second. So in the view of those who hold to this ideology, you're saying that what they're saying is the problem in the world is not the individual and their sinful nature, their fallen nature. The problem in our culture is the system.
Right.
And what do they mean by the system?
So these are going to be the cultural institutions, like your even like we talked about with the transhumanism conversation last time, is that we want to be liberated from all types of oppression, whether it's ethnic, whether it is class, the bourgeois versus the proletariat, the haves, the have-nots. It's called the power dynamic, and then it's applied across any
minority group in our culture.
Minority group, and what ends up happening
is
the oppressed. But what ends up happening is that it sets up this power dynamic, and then that's the lens through which they see everything. Where Marx started with economics, and then Antonio Gramsci, who was an Italian Marxist, applied Marxian philosophy to culture, and he said it's not the economics, even though that's an issue. He said it's the culture, and he believed that Western culture had to be subverted from the inside. And so that's where you get the long march through the institutions and things like that. But
and when was that?
So this would have been in the 1930s and 40s, and of course Marx came well before then. But this is where the ideas in the academy and higher education with academic intellectuals filter down, like they're not in the closed
So the
system.
long march of the institution was a strategy
by Rudy Deutsch
to play the long game. We're going to systematically subvert all of these Western institutions that are built on Judeo-Christian values and what was deemed as kind of the pre-modern or status quo norms of society on sexuality, gender, beliefs, all of those things. We're going to systematically take over these institutions so that we can then subvert what was the status quo to create a new society with new morals, new values, and a new utopian vision of the future. Is that what you're saying?
So what Gramsci was getting at was the question he was answering was, why didn't a communist revolution, why couldn't that take hold in a place like the United States of America? Like it worked in Russia, it worked in China, but why wouldn't it work here? And that's where he came up with what we would call cultural Marxism. He's like, the economy's too strong. There's too much faith. Families are strong. The institutions are strong. Therefore, you have to subvert the institutions, family, the church, economics. I mean, all of it. Arts, music.
You can take this Marxist principle of you have the status quo, and in order to create a new and better future, you have to create conflict by doing the opposite of the status quo, and through that conflict you create a new future.
Right.
And so communism was more located with economics. This Marxist ideology can be applied anywhere.
Right. So
gender, sexuality,
it's everything. Wherever you have a dynamic, you drive a cultural or social wedge. You find the weak point in the culture, and you drive a wedge there, a divisive wedge, and then you turn those people between an oppressor-oppressed dynamic, the power dynamic, and all of it's worth noting that it's all set up in a zero-sum game. So zero-sum game basically says there's limited resources, limited power, and that's all that there is. You have one pie, and say I have half a pie and I want more, and we're going to share this pie, then I have to take it from you. So if I want it, I have to take it from you. There's no more. I can't go make more pies or buy a pie store. That's not an option. So it's a zero-sum game. So the power dynamic is set within a zero-sum game. And then that's where the revolution happens. And it's the Hegelian dialectic at work of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And so basically the easy way to see that in operation, because that's theory, right, is problem, reaction, solution. So what you do is set up you drive a cultural wedge. So say in the United States, take race or ethnicity. I use biblical categories, so I just say there's only one race, multiple ethnicities. So where is a weak point in America? Well, we fought a war, the Civil War, over slavery. And it's see like that
it's in our past.
It's in the past.
Air. And why not leverage that?
Right. And so what they look for is what a friend of mine calls undetonated explosives in the culture, and they find that weak point, and then they make the division there.
So they're looking for any disenfranchised people to activate,
or they'll create them. So and then what I think it was I forget who said this. It said the issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. So what it means, when he's talking about there, and forgive me, I don't remember who said that. It doesn't matter if it's ethnicity or gender ideology or whatever. You basically use people, disenfranchised or minority groups, as cannon fodder for the revolution.
Yeah, and when they're not, them that they're a victim.
You build a victim status, and then you use them to do what? Attain power. And it's all political. Like, it's all political. That's the God is political, because what are you trying to reach within the Marxian vision is the utopia where, you reach where the state, everybody's equal and everybody's provided for and share everything. That's where you get the equity. And then you have the state eventually in that vision disappears, and you have a utopia where everybody's just
halfway
equal
after and sharing their goods equally. And
again, but at the very fundamentally, it's a distorted belief about the nature of God, the nature of man, the nature of truth,
and the nature of history. Because the Hegelian view of history is that it's cyclical.
Right.
That once you have the revolution, there's going to be a new status quo. And then we need to activate and create more conflict and find new victims to create the revolution, to create an even better utopian. So it never ends. It's not linear history.
It's always evolving. So, we could say history is seasonal as it moves in a linear path. I think that's accurate.
From their view.
No, I think from our view that you have a
it's linear. There's a start and an end.
Yeah, but there are spring, summer, fall and a winter. It's life. You're young and then you grow older. All those type of things. So, but they don't repeat, and you don't build this dynamic of this sublating the current state and then bringing about the clash culturally with another group to create the new ideal. And so it moves in this it actually moves in a corkscrew down. It decimates society because they find that wedge, and they find that wedge issue, which here race is a perfect example, ethnicity is a perfect example. Drive that wedge issue, divide people that we fought a war over, and hundreds of thousands of people died, and set a new precedent in America, like working towards our ideals as a country that are based in the Constitution and our founding. But it gets crazy when you start dividing people.
So this is what made Charlie Kirk such a threat, because everything he stood for in the minds of those who hold this ideology is anti-progress. Start a family, get married and have kids when you're young. Take responsibility for your life, no matter what cards you've been given in life. Put your faith in Jesus Christ.
Right.
Live for something bigger than yourself. Don't sit around feeling like a victim. Do something about it. And America's a great country. We've all been given all of these privileges and blessings, and that message is going to tamp down whatever revolution you're trying to create, because that gives hope to college students. For example, that was his primary audience.
Yeah.
Now they start believing that, I can make something in my life. I don't need to tear down and destroy. I can build.
Right.
And is that what you would say made him such a threat? Is he was so effective at giving a alternative vision of the good life than the vision that a lot of students were getting in our universities around the country?
I think that was part of the threat, but I think the core of what the alternative worldview was threatened by is that he was telling the truth about reality and biblical reality as it is, as God's created it, and working within the contours of reality. And there's a lot of freedom there, but then
is that he was this country was built on those realities.
Right.
Those are the norms that we inherited, and he represented those in a powerful way where tens of thousands, and now we realize people around the world were resonating with his message. And he was affecting the political environment, the religious environment, the educational environment, and all he was doing was recovering the norms that built Western civilization, and that's
a threat,
is a danger, and most people aren't effective enough to get on their radar. But he was 31 years old.
Yeah,
I mean, that's one of the heartbreaking things about seeing him be murdered is think of what he could have done over the next 30 years. And that's a part of what I'm thinking. But then I look at how many young people are going to be inspired by his sacrifice and what I would say is his Christian martyrdom. And now they're activated, and his views, his beliefs, his courage is now multiplied exponentially. And in fact, one pastor, Pete Hegseth, in his talk was talking about his pastor, Doug Wilson, who said that he thought the devil overplayed his hand.
Yeah.
In this situation, and actually this has created a revival of these things that we believe in.
Yeah, I agree. I think the saying that, I don't know where it originated, that the blood of the martyrs that seed the church, that
I think it's Tertullian, early church, way back,
church father.
Yeah.
And you see throughout history, because oftentimes in America we don't see a lot of martyrdom in
the West.
In the West. Now, I would say that there was a black church, predominantly black church I think it was in Charleston several years ago, where this young white supremacist guy goes in and slaughters these people. I believe they're martyrs. They were in a prayer and Bible meeting, and they're martyrs. But the difference is that they weren't public. They weren't.
They didn't have the reach.
The notoriety or somebody.
Yeah.
So their deaths are just as tragic and as important as Charlie's. But Charlie just had a bigger platform and more people knew him, so it had a bigger ripple effect. But from my perspective, just watching the numbers, we had more people at church that Sunday. We've got more, and I'm hearing from other pastors. Like, I'm talking to people that haven't been to church in 20 years or hadn't opened their Bible since they were a kid.
They were going to come to King's Cross, our church, King's Cross Fellowship, months ago, and she was like, "Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to be there," and she never showed up. This was probably 6 months, and then she showed up the Sunday I was out and you were preaching, and she texted me and said, "Hey, I really enjoyed it, and I'm sorry I haven't come until this point, but Charlie Kirk's death inspired me to go to go."
I think that's
a lot of people,
millions of people, and so. With that being said, what you're seeing, I think what we're seeing is the fruit of his ministry. I mean, you're seeing where he unfortunately doesn't see it this side of eternity, but through his death, you've seen an explosion of people coming to faith. I saw at the event, one gal get saved.
We'll never see the fruit.
We won't see
full fruit of that.
Right. Even here I spoke at the TPUSA TCU chapter's memorial service, which was a privilege to be there last week. And a couple of guys walked up to me and said, "Hey, a guy came to Christ. He's not even from the United States. He's a student here." And and that's what I'd been praying for. I was like, Lord, just one, because I knew there'd be a couple hundred people there. Yeah. I knew the gospel would be shared. I mean, it was incredible. But the people that something's happening, but people that have kind of gotten pulled into the alternative, the Marxian kind of the repressive tolerance worldview or logic, many of them that have just been pulled into, have really thought about it, are seeing what the logical implications that if I continue to believe this, then this is where this type of thing is normalized. Like, killing and assassinating your enemy is in the realm of options. If speech is violence,
it's a dangerous world to live in.
Yeah, telling the truth is violence. It's one thing if I threaten you and say I'm going to kill you or harm your family. That's one thing. There's laws that deal with that. But just disagreeing with somebody and saying what you believe, and just because you don't like that's violence because they said this thing that I disagree with, and that gives me, within the logic of repressive tolerance, that violence is an option. Physical violence.
Let's hone in on that. When I used to do I used to do post-college residency program,
which was an awesome program.
Just a 10-month kind of leadership and discipleship program at my previous church. I would assign all kinds of readings that were, they were readings from people who disagree with us. But I think one of the most important essays, almost like a Rosetta Stone to help make sense of all this stuff that's going on, and the irrationality of, like, how can you celebrate the death of Charlie Kirk and then be outraged that Jimmy Kimmel was let go and is now being brought back? But I'm talking like that was a fascist, violation of free speech. And Charlie Kirk he's just been assassinated, and they were gleefully rejoicing in that. And then they're outraged at a comedian being fired.
That's a great example of repressive tolerance.
So
go ahead.
Repressive tolerance, Herbert Marcuse, his argument, and then I want to hear you elaborate on it, is that the tolerance that we are promoting in America today, and this was written in 1965, it's a fake tolerance, and I'm paraphrasing somewhat because a lot of Marxist writings are very confusing and wordy. Yeah. But essentially, it's like the oppressors, the people in power, want to convince those that are oppressed that they need to be tolerant, and they don't need to start a revolution or fight or have conflict. And the way they do that is through civil discourse and debate, and dialogue and freedom of speech. And what Marcuse is saying is that is not real tolerance. That is a kind of tolerance that keeps the oppressed oppressed. For him, the only way to achieve real what he calls liberating tolerance.
Liberating tolerance. The key word, liberating.
Yeah, liberating tolerance, and this utopian view of everyone's free to do you can do whatever you want whenever you want, and every view is accepted.
Right.
The only way for liberating tolerance to become the norm is to be intolerant to the current tolerance. So,
yeah. How's that work out?
Charlie Kirk was operating in the classic view of tolerance, which is you're free to express your ideas. You're free to a certain degree to live according to your beliefs. And I'm going to tolerate that. I'm going to permit that, but I disagree. Yeah. I think you're wrong and I'm right. But we're going to have a conversation about it. We're going to debate. We're going to argue. We're going to get mad at each other, and then we're going to shake hands afterwards.
Right.
That's kind of the classic view of tolerance. Marcuse says that has to be rejected because that's going to keep, and he explicitly says, the conservative norms is going to forever stay in place if we operate according to those rules. So we've got to revolt against that pseudo-tolerance. And the only way to do that is to censor the norms, censor right-wing views, right-wing media outlets, right-wing fill in the blank. And this is him saying it, not me.
Yeah.
And then that leaves space for left-wing views and more Marxist views, because he was in essence a Marxist, to now have a fair hearing. So last thing, and I'll turn it over. We think of a good journalist as being unbiased to the best of their ability. Everybody's got biases, but
if we could find some, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm going to try to report the facts of the events and leave you to critique and evaluate,
right,
meaning behind these events. He says that view of journalism, for example, will always give precedent to conservatism and the classic historical norms of society. So we need journalists, he would say, that censor one side of the story in order to promote the other side and give the other side a fair hearing. Because if it's always equal, then the dominant oppressor view is always going to win.
Right.
There's a lot more we can elaborate on that, but what do you think about that idea, and what are some of the problems with that?
Well, what he's getting at with the repressive tolerance and this liberating tolerance is that you tolerate and promote ideas from the political lens. Always, we have to remember, you see it through a political lens, like everything, it's pure power. That you promote and protect and tolerate everything that would be seen as from the political left. And then you're intolerant, meaning you repress, you censor anything from the political right, which then would include Christianity, Christian ideals.
Of course.
And
unless you redefine Christian ideals to fit
right, yeah,
the ideology in the left,
sure.
and there's people happening all over the place.
Yeah. So what ends up happening is that's where you get the idea of cancel culture, is that what you need to do is repress anything from the political right, that includes Christianity, and build a wall to keep it out, and forcefully keep it out. And then you promote everything from the political left and allow it to flourish and grow. And then that's called tolerance. So what he's doing is basically redefining tolerance and then using it as a weapon to repress any ideas from the right. That's where you get the idea of cancel culture. And then the thing is with Marcuse, it gets implemented. So it takes theory. And so Marcuse was a communist. He was a part of the Frankfurt School and then came to Columbia. They moved to Frankfurt School because they were fleeing Hitler.
Which was at Berkeley, right?
Yeah. They originally moved to Columbia.
Okay.
Columbia, Berkeley, and then he ended up at Brandeis. And so he was very instrumental. He was at the Frankfurt School. He created critical theory.
Yeah, he was an educator.
So critical theory, everything that comes from critical theory, critical social theories, all of those things come from the mind of Marcuse and others that were in his sphere. This is why education and the academy are so important, because those ideas don't stay there. They flow out and they shape culture and the way people think and live. And so that theory then gets picked up and people start believing it, and then it becomes praxis. They begin implementing it and then acting on the theory. And then that's where you get, 60 years later, we have cancel culture. Like, where did that come from?
Well, and education,
tolerance.
Education from kindergarten all the way through graduate school is about political activism, not establishing facts and norms and truth, because
that's where you get into critical pedagogy, and that comes in through all these different areas. Yeah.
So let me read. I just want to read this and get your thoughts on it. So he says, the conclusion reached is that the realization of the objective of tolerance would call for intolerance toward prevailing policies, attitudes, opinions, and the extension of tolerance to policies, attitudes, and opinions which are outlawed or suppressed. And there's no qualification there. So, and he talks about this, whatever sexual perversion that's out there that's deemed taboo needs to be propped up.
Because it's oppressive. You need to be liberated.
Right, it's taboo because the status quo says it's taboo, but freedom in his mind, is to be able to do whatever he wants. So we've got to empower these people that are holding to these, perverted sexual views, for example, and empower them and uplift them and give them prominence and give them a platform. And then we've got to do the best we can to demonize and vilify the sexual norms of the Christian heritage that we inherited.
And it's always goes back to all roads lead to Marx, which, anytime you deal with sexuality and things like that and set up this dynamic, it's always going to attack the family. You set up an oppressor-oppressed dynamic within feminism where the woman is to be liberated, and you can do, you live in a man's world. You have to do what men do. You have, and it becomes, rather than equal in value, it distorts it, and it's equal in responsibility and role. And then that's where you break apart marriage, you break apart relationships. So there's one wedge right there. But then any type of sexual sin is, particularly when it's elevated and protected, then it is going to drive a wedge into the family, because it's going to impact the family. And that's what Marx was about. That was one of the areas, was one of the core,
because the family is the center of a community. It starts with the family.
All culture starts in the family.
Yeah.
So
if you want to redefine culture, you have to redefine family.
Right. If you want to change the culture, you've got to change the family. Period. And that's what's so interesting. Back to Charlie Kirk. What did he say? Find a good woman, find a good husband, get married, have children, work, find a job, find meaningful work, and basically live out your life along Christian principles within
young
God's
people
reality.
Were responding in droves.
And that's what people want, because a lot of students that I've talked to, you hear the American dream thrown around everywhere, this American dream, but when you talk to them, like, that doesn't exist. It's not real. It's something that maybe was in the past, but it doesn't exist anymore. But more and more, you're starting to see younger people getting married younger, having children younger, like the 1940s and 50s and earlier, which is incredible to watch, because it's a response to repressive tolerance, which, I follow James Lindsay, have things I disagree on him, but he understands
the theoretical,
communism, and even the theological. He understands communism better than anyone else, I think, on the planet. But he always says that we're living in the logic of repressive tolerance, that the cancel culture type of tolerance that we live in, that this is kind of like the air that we breathe, and we have to, response is to break through, because that's not reality. So we're kind of in a turning point where people are actually,
you can't
responding.
live in a fictional worldview forever. At a certain point, you realize that these ideas are bankrupt. And
they end in
they don't get what they promise.
Destruction. What they promise is utopia. Where they end is destruction. And where repressive tolerance, when it is applied, it goes from Marcusean theory and then gets praxis and then applied, and then you take it to the logical conclusion. Well, if you want to act out on repressive tolerance, then eventually people are going to die.
Well, and on that point, that essay, I think it's the essay to understand the theory behind why people are behaving this way. And then the second resource I would say is just as important as Marcuse's, is Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. Because he's the pragmatist of these theoretical views. And what
he's
Alinsky
the one that
say,
turns it into praxis.
Right.
He's like, let's take theory and then put it into action within a society.
A pragmatic primer, Rules for Radicals, a pragmatic primer for realistic radicals. And, in his acknowledgments, he acknowledges the first radical, Satan.
Who won his own kingdom.
Yeah. And so what Alinsky would say is, okay, so So you take Marcuse's theory about tolerance. Okay, if we want true liberating tolerance, we've got to suppress and repress the current tolerance in our society and the current norms. What Alinsky, part of his tactics is to demonize those who hold to these traditional norms in society.
Yeah.
So whatever means necessary, you isolate, you slander, and you destroy the character of the individual that's holding these values. And so, you
pick a target, you freeze it, you attack it.
There you go. And so you see, I've seen a lot of young people on X and Instagram be like, I've watched Charlie Kirk for the first time and all these clips, and it's like, he's not a Nazi.
Yeah.
He's not a fascist. He's not a racist. You're hearing it across the board. Well, why did they think that? Because these tactics are being utilized against people that it's not true of those people.
And they're very effective.
Extremely
they're very effective because if you take away someone's personal responsibility and their dignity by
their morality, their moral high ground.
Well, that's moral subversion. That's psychological subversion where you demoralize. This is back to Yuri Brezhnev. If you watch his videos from like 1986, his interview, I forget who the interviewer was. I mean, he was a Russian, he was a KGB dissident, and he was like, this is exactly how things are working out. And you can go watch his videos, are very interesting, but you were like, this is what we're living in. You psychologically subvert people, you demoralize them, meaning that you subvert their morals, not make them feel bad. You subvert their morals, and then you take it. Basically, it gives you control over a group of people that buy into that. And then if you take away someone's dignity and responsibility by putting them in a victim class, and then that becomes their identity, and then you apply the intersectionality piece to it, and you divide people into all these groups, and that it's all tribal. Well, the people empowered, the true Marxians don't care about that. Like they don't care. That's what they want. They don't believe that because they're interested in power. It's all about power. For the true Marxists, everybody else is just cannon fodder to gain power. And that means political power, economic power, all of that. So, the repressive tolerance is then implemented by Saul Alinsky, and then that becomes
the community organizer in Chicago.
Right. And it's his ideas 60, 70 years later are still implemented. That's why when somebody with ideas dies, their ideas don't die with them.
And they're very effective, because what ends up happening, if you take those tactics and you isolate a leader in the conservative movement, for example, and you dig up dirt
or you can make it so lying is in the realm of options. Killing is so when power's the ultimate goal, then everything's at your disposal. They don't play by rules. He says in Rules are Radical, we use their morals and their rules against them. They have to play by their rules, meaning Christians, conservatives, whatever you want to say. They have to play by their rules, but we don't have to play by their rules. So every option's on the table.
That's the point I'm making, is that they isolate the leader, and then they create. And they find it too.
Right.
Nobody's perfect.
Right.
They've got people that dig up whatever, they lie, they build narratives, and then because we hold to certain moral values, we disassociate from that leader, and now that leader has lost influence not only in the culture but with their own community.
So what do? They drove a wedge.
They drive a wedge. Yeah.
And so what did you see? I mean, what was really interesting, the response to Charlie Kirk, what ended up happening, one of the biggest worship services in the history of the world. Like, what was the response? It was grace, mercy, and ultimately his wife forgiving the man that murdered her husband just a week and a half later.
Well, that's the power. The power of martyrdom is that now this person's life is complete, and so, in a way, their legacy is established among their people on their platform, and you can't tarnish that. It's done, and so that tactic doesn't work anymore.
It came from hundreds of millions of people, however many people saw the service and heard from Erica Kurt. That's where the gospel intersects and collides with the other worldview, because there's no burning cities, there's no people rioting. We had a worship service and a memorial, and you saw
our response to an injustice was very different.
Right. And what you saw was not only, or what you heard was the gospel shared, but then you saw the gospel embodied. So what you saw was the gospel embodied, because think about it, Erica Kurt, she's a normal woman like any other human being, a sinner saved by grace. She knows that when she shared Jesus's words from the cross, forgive them for they know not what they do. She was talking about those crucifying Jesus, a sinless man, 100% God, 100% man, taking on the sins of the world. He was asking for forgiveness from them, but as a repentant believer, she knows she's a sinner, but then knows that she has to forgive because that's what Jesus did. And she embodied the gospel in that moment, and millions of people saw that. The other speeches and talks were wonderful, but that was a significant moment because that was someone embodying the gospel and living it out right in front of you on live TV. And I had to ask myself whether I could do that. If someone killed my wife or child, would I be able to forgive?
Yeah, it's powerful.
And I can't guarantee that. I'd love to say.
And that happened in Charleston, by the way. They forgave the killer.
They forgave the killer.
That destroys the narrative, the mischaracterizations of those who hold to.
Right. And you hear stories about a drunk driver kills a man's son. The father just hates the man that killed his son and then ends up forgiving him. And then the two men become best friends. The guy comes to Christ. The drunk driver comes to Christ, gets out of jail. They become friends and they're brothers in Christ. And now they're in relationship with. That's the power of the gospel. Yeah. Nothing else can, like these barriers among people. Only the gospel can break through those barriers, because you have to make peace with God through Jesus Christ first before you can make peace true peace with anyone else.
Yeah, that's good. Two quick things before we go to the Q&A.
Right.
I want to read a quote from Marcuse on education, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. He says, more than ever, the proposition holds true that progress in freedom demands progress in the consciousness of freedom. And consciousness is a very Marxist thing that is very confusing, but where the mind has been made into a subject object of politics and policies, intellectual autonomy, the realm of pure thought has become a matter of political education, or what he calls counter education. And then he says this, and I want to hear your thoughts. This means that previously neutral, value-free, formal aspects of learning and teaching now become on their own grounds and in their own right political. Learning to know the facts, the whole truth, and to comprehend it is radical criticism throughout, intellectual subversion. In a world in which the human faculties and needs are arrested or perverted, autonomous thinking leads into a perverted world, contradiction and counter-image of the established world of repression. And then he says, unless the student learns to think in the opposite direction, he will be inclined to place the facts into the predominant framework of values. And then he goes on and talks about education is not about communicating true facts and values.
Right.
Education is about politicizing individuals in order to liberate them. And we've heard in the past 5 years, like 2 + 2 = 5. Math is repressive or racist, and that is coming directly out of this philosophy that we're going to use education for political purposes.
Yeah.
Because, like you said earlier, everything's political. And education is about creating activists to promote the revolution, not teaching them facts and values and beliefs. But what are your thoughts on that?
That's communism 101. I mean, that is the dialectic at work, and because again, what is he talking about in there? He's talking about politics and power, and that is the world. That is that's where power is domiciled in a culture, in a society. So then education becomes a political act, and that means that instead of educating children and students classically, pursuing truth, like teaching truth and moral formation and
like a classical education,
civic duty, and learning the sciences, and allowing the student to pursue the truth in whatever domain, if it's science or education or business, whatever that
reason,
is, pursuing
logic, rhetoric,
all of those things are the
yeah.
basis for it. But then they can pursue that, knowing how to pursue truth and tell and have discernment between truth and a lie. And that then becomes the enemy of trying to attain power, because where that leads is to a biblical worldview. That leads to
which is associated with the oppressors.
Right.
And so
then it's all about power. And then
if you teach classical education, if you teach students the history of Western civilization, Christianity, and the heritage of the Enlightenment, reason, logic, and rhetoric, and those things, then you're just making them tools for the oppressors. Yeah. So we've got to reject all that and teach them how to be political. And I heard one guy talk about Paulo Freire, who was a Brazilian educator, very prominent Marxist. He said, he gave an example of, if you're in like a kindergarten class and you're telling a story, and it's like you're teaching a math equation. One family got on a mother and dad got on the bus with their kids, and there was 4 of them, and they rode to, this location, and it was 5 miles. How many miles? Like an equation, a comprehensive equation. Paulo Freire's view of education is why is the mother and father a male and a female? Why does it have to be 2 parents of opposite genders? And so the whole class becomes criticizing the norms, not what's the math equation that you're trying to figure out. So math becomes a tool to politicize and to break down whatever is normal.
That's why they call it critical.
Yeah.
So critical theory is the critiquing,
deconstructing whatever.
Yeah, and it deconstructs the idea, but then it shifts away from pursuing truth to pursuing a political ideology. But why would you want students to believe in the political ideology and shape their worldview in that direction? Well, so you can control them, and then they can be cannon fodder for the revolution, which is to attain power.
Okay, last thing. His thoughts on violence, and this goes directly to why I think some people don't see the inconsistency between having an uproar about Jimmy Kimmel getting fired and celebrating the assassination of a 31-year-old man. Okay. Marcuse says that if the alternatives are between violent and nonviolent change, the latter is to be preferred, but if the established violence prevents nonviolent change, then violence may become necessary. So the established violence that he's talking about is police, is any kind of restraint or law or authority that can wield the sword, so to speak. And biblically, in Romans 13, the purpose of the state is to wield the sword to promote good and to punish evil. He's saying that the oppressors have the tools of violence. And so if all we use is words, then we're never going to gain.
You're never going to break the status quo.
That's the ideal.
And liberate people.
But if we need to use violence, then we use violence.
That's why violence is an option. And when words don't work, then some people will resort to violence. And then if you resort to violence, people are going to die. That's why the revolution is a violent revolution. It begins with trying to change the ideas, then the language, and then it moves on to, well, that's not working. Well, we have to then use violence. And then what do? You apply the Saul Alinsky, like you pick the target, you freeze it, you ridicule it, do all those things.
And if that didn't work,
that doesn't work, then the target is a legitimate target
for assassination,
for assassination, for violence,
or violence in the streets, riots. There's all kinds of tactics in this book on how to leverage violence for your, know,
in the Christian
end
response,
justifies the means.
In the Christian responses, that's not true. That's not good, true, and beautiful, the way that we respond. And that's, I forget who said it, may have been Allie Beth Stuckey. She was talking about at the Charlie Kirk Memorial that you had people are thinking in two categories, that you had the pastors and Erica Kirk, preaching the gospel, even though that you had some of the politicians that were preaching the gospel, but then you had Steve Miller come out guns blazing. We are going to
hold these people
we're going to hold these people accountable. This is going to happen, and blah, 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 and start showing. And she framed it so well. She was like, well, individually as Christians, we can defend ourselves, self-defense, but we should show grace and turn the other cheek. If someone disagrees with us, or, as long as it's not violence, you're not defending yourself, then we show grace and we're tolerant. But then she said, who is speaking is from the government. They don't bear the sword in vain. So in order for us to disagree, if we disagree, we're not going to get violent. What restrains you from getting violent with me? If you're a violent person and we disagree, well, if the government doesn't bear the sword in vain, meaning they can use violence appropriately under God's ordination, then that's going to help to restrain you from being violent against me based on ideas.
Absolutely.
And so that's what was demonstrated, is that you saw the sword being unsheathed, saying, here's the sword, while the individual Christian is saying, turn the other cheek, forgive. So you had a different dynamic at work.
That's exactly right. And when we talk about fighting and spiritual or culture war, we're talking about ideas and principalities and powers. And so the weapon that we wield is the sword of the Spirit, the Word of God. And the great victory is oftentimes through martyrdom. We defeat our enemies that have no moral framework and will use whatever means necessary, and it ends up backfiring.
Yeah.
Let's stop there, and then we'll continue this.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of great questions tonight, gentlemen, and I would like you to hold your responses to a total of 3 minutes each, because there are several good ones, including a couple challenging ones, which I'm just going to direct at Tyler.
Good. Perfect. I'm taking a nap. Go get some pizza.
I'd like to get through all of these.
Okay. How many are there, by the way?
I've got 6 that I would really like to answer.
Okay.
So the first one is, in general, how can we use the Word of God to guide us in engaging with cultural ideologies that conflict with biblical truth? What is a general plan for that?
Speaking the truth in love, I think is the general umbrella that we would use the Word of God under. Grace and truth. And I think I mentioned this week one, it means genuinely caring about the individual that you're having the debate with, as an image bearer of God, as someone that maybe is very deceived and going down a path that is a destructive path. And so I think it's your motivation behind having these engagements with people who disagree. Why are you doing it? And if it's not rooted in a desire to see them come to the knowledge of the truth and a desire to see them flourish, then it's probably not a great motivation. But that would be my broad umbrella.
I think that's definitely a good mindset to go into it with, going into a debate or a disagreement. And the framework, I think I would add to it, is getting at the root of what they believe. I always talk about the tree, and how the tree set up is what do they where is the distortion about what they believe about the nature of God, the nature of man, the nature of truth? Where is the distortion? It could be all three, it could be one, but what are they fundamentally where's the disagreement, and then what do they fundamentally believe that's driving their disagreement, and then
you can only know that by asking questions.
And it's not like a one question deal. It really could take some people years to work through something, but it oftentimes these problems get worked out across a table. You invite them to coffee or over a meal, because when you break bread together, when you share a cup of coffee with someone in a different environment, and you just have a conversation, it oftentimes pulls a lot of the poison and emotion out of it, to where you can start. And I always try to find common ground with someone, and not superficial common ground, but something that we could agree on, and then okay, let's figure out this disagreement, and then go back and forth. And if it gets a little heated, that's okay. And if it doesn't get resolved, at least you put a stone in their shoe, and it won't get resolved in one conversation if it's a core belief issue. But that's okay. You've had a conversation, and then you're faithful in that conversation, adhering to what Tyler said and what we believe as Christians, and letting God work, but then saying, hey, well, why don't we just have another conversation? And maybe we don't agree, and maybe we don't come to agreement. That's okay. You have the right to disagree. You have the right to debate, and that's okay. So.
Excellent. Another question that comes from one of the students in our audience is, what do you think Charlie Kirk would say to Jimmy Kimmel?
I don't know if Jimmy Kimmel would have a conversation with
him. I think he may poke a little fun, because he was that was he had a sense of humor, but I think it's the same thing. I think it was it Van Jones, somebody that had a disagreement with Charlie Kirk, like a media.
It was Van Jones.
Was it Van Jones?
Yeah.
That Charlie Kirk had reached out to him, like I believe it was within 24 or 48 hours of him getting shot, and said, let's sit down and have a conversation. That I think that would be it. I mean, I think he would just want to sit down and talk, because that's what he did. He was a discussion guy. I mean, let's talk about it. Let's talk about our differences.
I think he would say also, what is your purpose as a late night? I think he would talk about that, like, if you want to be political, then go start a podcast and be political. But if you're going to be in this role as a late night host, then your job's to entertain people and to make people laugh, and to give people a break from all of the political noise. And I think he would say, hey, you have the right to say whatever you want to say politically, but is that the right platform to do it?
Is that the right context?
Yes, that's right. Is that the right context? I think he would. I bet he would.
And I think
talk about that.
To your point, Tyler, is that you look at interviews with the late great Johnny Carson, who you really couldn't tell his political views at all, but he had people.
And that was intentional.
But it was very, when you hear these interviews, I'm like, this guy's extremely intelligent, funny, but wise in the way of what his role and responsibility was as a late night comedian host of a late night show. I mean, he knew what he could have his views, and that's fine, but his job is to entertain. And he was one of the best at it. I used to grow up watching Johnny Carson. I loved it. I mean, so I don't know what Charlie would say to him, but I think they would have a discussion.
He would also say you probably need to start a podcast, because the late night world, I think that's going to go by the wayside in the near future.
Yeah.
People aren't watching.
Yeah, they're losing money. I think it's $40 million a year. So
that was an excellent answer, gentlemen. Our next question is an excellent, challenging question. You've talked about Marxism and the fact that it creates cultural wedges, emphasizes marginalized groups, and divides people. But it seems to the questioner that all sides engage in these sorts of strategies. For example, conservatives also highlight wedge issues like immigration and abortion, frame conflicts between woke and conservative values, and appeal to marginalized groups like blue-collar workers, people living in the Rust Belt. isn't what you're calling Marxist politics really just regular politics?
That's a great question. Lance, why don't you take that?
Yeah. So I think what it has to do is which worldview framework are you working within? The idea that, okay, so if let's take the abortion issue, well, that's not a political issue, that's a moral issue. If you take, and then it works out through politics and legislation, because God's idea for life, the Imago Dei, created in the image of God, is that your life has value from womb to tomb, from conception to the last breath, and it has to be protected, whether you're productive or not in the eyes of the world. You're not just a machine. Your life has value. So even if you're an invalid or struck with dementia or Alzheimer's and at the end of life, then those lives have to be protected just like they have to be protected in the womb. So that is a moral framework. So something like immigration, that is a moral framework. So you have to treat people with dignity and respect, but there's a certain order of loves that Christians ought to have, which it's love God. The next circle is you love and take care of your family, and then it's your neighbors and your friends in your community, and you would put your church there, and then it doesn't mean that you love people across the globe less. This means that I'm called to love and care for the people closest to me, and then to the best of my ability that I'm capable, of course I can help. That's why we have global missions and relief organizations that are trying. I wish they would deal with some of the regulations on really good organizations that are helping. But my first responsibility is to love God, love my wife, love my family, love and protect and provide for my family, love and protect in my church and my close friend group, my neighbors that live around me, that are in proximity to me, and then to my best of my ability to help other people. And so, but God, in God's economy, he allows us to do that. There's human beings can do a lot. A single human being can do a lot. But it's kind of like the framework of the question is it's not the same thing. There's a moral biblical frame that by its nature, the gospel and the Bible is divisive. It is. The road is narrow. Jesus Christ coming here is you are, because the road is narrow and there's only one way to the Father, then by definition there is no other way, so there is your division. And when you talk to people from different faith backgrounds that come to Christ, they experience the division, whether they come out of Islam or they're coming out just out of the LGBT community. Oftentimes they're shunned by that group because they don't want to be a part of it, and they come to Christ. Well, then that's where the church opens its doors. That's where there is a division there. It's a natural division that God has created in reality. It's not a man made division in order to gain political power or social capital, if that makes sense. You have anything to add?
I think it's a legitimate dilemma, because a large part of our Western civilization was built on kind of a secular libertarian view of tolerance, where everybody needs to keep their faith and morals and values private, and as long as what you do and how you live doesn't hurt people, then you're free to do that. And it's almost this idea that that we can actually be neutral as a society, that we can have neutral education, neutral to a certain degree politics. And the reality is, what we're seeing is that there is no neutral. And that libertarian view, I think, has some serious flaws, but so how do we correct that? And I think every culture has norms and taboos, and that's going to create a divide. These are acceptable behaviors. These are unacceptable behaviors. These are things we can tolerate. These are things we can't tolerate. And so I think the person's got a great point that there is Samuel Huntington wrote a book called The Clash of Civilizations. There is a clash going on, but to Lance's point, I would say there is an objective truth as well. And what we believe our civilization was built on are norms that lead to the flourishing and common good of society. And so we will fight to restore and recover those things in the political arena or in the social arena because we believe they're true. And that's we were going to talk about this next meeting on the 21st, or on the 7th, but on the 21st, we're going to talk about relativism and, what that has done to society and relativism versus absolute truth, which I think will go to some of what that questioner is getting at.
You bring up secularism, and there's a quote by Os Guinness, which I think this secularization of the culture where it's basically the Enlightenment informing and shaping what we believe, getting us away from biblical faith and a foundation. That Os Guinness said that secularism has failed to provide at least three things that humans desperately need: meaning, belonging, and purpose. As such, America has experienced its deepest crisis since the Civil War. Secularism is an idea, and the idea has consequences, and because of that, it's incompatible with a biblical vision for life and human flourishing and pursuing truth. So you do have a civilizational conflict coming from the Enlightenment, based on the Enlightenment, and then coming out of the Reformation and the foundation of this. Without the Reformation, you don't get the American Revolution in this nation. So you have the American Revolution at odds with the Enlightenment and the French Revolution. That we're still fighting that war in the United States right now. The guillotine is the cancel culture. We're going to cut off your bank. We're going to cut off your livelihood. We're going to cut this off. They're not going to, besides with Charlie, that's the response. That's where the violence gets infused into it. So we have to just understand, and that, like, back to the question, Christians have to think deeply and worldviewishly about the issue, and it's not as simple as a 5-minute or now 6-minute answer. So we got 5 minutes left.
So fortunately, both of you answered one of the other questions in the process of responding to that one, which was, by the way, is truth inherently divisive? Which I guess the answer is clearly yes.
Yeah. Well, it precludes whatever is not true. So it is divisive. So if I say, I love and I'm dedicated to my wife, and you hear me saying that to someone else, and then you see me say that I love and I'm dedicated to another woman that's not my wife, then what's true? There's something incompatible there. So the truth is, it's interesting.
Yeah, if you read the Bible, it's divisive.
Yeah. Divides right to the heart, man.